One of the tasks that you'll most probably perform on IIS is adding websites. You may even find that you will need to host multiple websites on the same server. IIS has support for multiple websites on the same IP address and port. It does this by using the requested URL to determine which websites to direct the request to. Consider this example. When a user attempts to connect to a web server using HTTP over port 80, the web server has two websites on port 80 and does not know which one to return. To allow multiple websites on the same port, the web server looks at the URL the user is requesting. By looking at the URL, the web server can determine which website to return to the user. This means a single web server can host many websites, all on the same IP address and all on the same port. Let's have a look how to set up a website. To create a new website, first open the ISS admin tool from Administrative Tools under the Start menu. Next, expand down to Sites. Right-click Sites and select the option Add Website. Enter a name for the website. This is for administrative purposes and not seen by the end user. Next, enter the path that contains the web data you wish to use. The data does not need to be on the local server. It can be contained on a file share. If this is the case, you may enter a username and password using the Connect As button. Once this is done, you can test the connection with the Test Settings button. The next section, you can set the bindings. For a standard website, you want HTTP, but you could select HTTPS if you wanted to set up a secure website. Also, you can select which IP address will be used for the website and the port. If you are planning to host multiple websites on the same web server using the same IP address and port, you will need to enter in a host name. The host name allows IIS to determine which website to direct users' requests to. Lastly, if you don't want the web page to start automatically, deselect the tick box Start Website Immediately. Your new website will now be created under Sites. If you are not planning on using the default website, it is a good idea to go in and stop it. With the new website, you may want to configure some limits. Select the website and then select the Limits option from the action pane. Here you can set a limit on how much bandwidth the website will use and also limit the number of connections to the website. For your new website, you can also set up logging by selecting the logging icon. By default, the log file will be saved in W3C format, which is a text-based format. If you want to change the data saved in the log file, press the button, select Fields. The fields selected by default give you a lot of information, but depending on your needs, you may want to change them. By default, the log files will be stored under the iNet pub directory under the folder Logs, but you can change that if you need to. The log file and rollover will determine when new log files are created. By default, a new log file will be created each day. However, on websites that do not have a lot of traffic, you may want to set this to weekly or monthly to make processing the log files easier. You can also set the rollover to be based on the size of the log file. And lastly, switch off the log files altogether. Logging does reduce the performance of your web server. If you have a busy web server and do not require any logs, you may want to switch logging off. The last option, use local time for naming and rollover, uses the local time of the server in the file name of the log file. If you have a web server in different time zones, this is helpful in determining the local time when the logs were created. This can be useful when troubleshooting problems. If you are planning on migrating an existing ISS 6 setup or upgrading from Windows Server 2003 to Windows Server 2008, then you may need to install some of the ISS 6 compatibility options that Windows Server 2008 has to offer. By default, ISS 6 compatibility options are not installed by default in Windows Server 2008. There are 5 different compatibility components. First, ISS 6 Management Compatibility. This is the root component and required to support other ISS 6 compatibility components. ISS 6 Management Compatibility also installs Admin Base Object and Active Directory Services interface. If you have web applications that use these, you will need to install this component. ISS 6 came with a metabase that stored settings for ISS. These settings have been replaced with an XML file in ISS 7. If you have web applications that query ISS 6 metabase, you will need to install the ISS 6 metabase compatibility component. This will enable ISS 6 web applications to use the same interface as before. If your ISS 6 web applications use Windows Management Instruments or WMI to configure ISS, you may need to install ISS 6 WMI compatibility. This will provide the ISS 6 WMI interface for your web applications. With ISS 7, there have been a lot of improvements and additions to scripting. Microsoft provides the ISS 6 scripting tools component to allow you to run and later migrate these scripts to ISS 7. This component also installs ActiveX data objects. Lastly, if you require the old admin tool, you can install ISS Management Console. If you need to manage remote ISS 6 installations, you will need to install this component. The ISS 7 tool cannot connect to ISS 6 installs. You will also need this tool if you want to enable ISS 6 features not available in ISS 7. If you have an existing Windows Server 2003 ISS install, you may want to consider doing an in-place upgrade. If you do perform an in-place upgrade, keep in mind that 90% or more of the optional components in ISS are installed automatically with the upgrade. For this reason, after the upgrade, it is a good idea to go into Server Manager and remove what components that you do not need. Microsoft do this to maximize the success of the upgrade. If you can't afford to take the risk of your upgrade having problems, you can always migrate your websites manually. If your website is mainly static content, all you need to do is copy over the static content and then set up the website again using the admin tool. Remember, before you upgrade, test first. Microsoft have done a lot to provide backward support for ISS 6, but during the upgrade, things can always go wrong. A common requirement with web servers is to access data from another server. Using ISS, you can use virtual directories to present data from another server to the user. In this example, the end user is accessing a web page on a web server. Some of the data, sales data, is located in the sales department on another server. Using virtual directories, you can mount the data so it appears as a separate directory under the root of the website. If you have data that needs to be shared on a number of web servers, for example, if you have a server farm, you can use the same data on multiple web servers. As shown here, the image folder is shared between two web servers. To add a virtual directory is very simple. From ISS Manager, expand down to the website that you want to add the virtual directory to, right-click the website and then select the option in the menu, Add Virtual Directory. From here, you can enter in an alias. This is the name of the folder that will appear to the client. Next, enter in the physical path to the share. By default, ISS will use the username and password provided by the user. If you want to use a specific user account, you can enter one by using the Connect As button. If the data is made available to the general public, you should enter a username and password. Otherwise, a user without a username and password will not be able to access any of the data. Next, you should press the Test Settings button. This will test the path and permissions and confirms that ISS can connect to the server. Once you have created the virtual directory, it will appear on your website. The whole process is transparent to the user, so they'll be unaware that the data presented to them is on another server. Application pools in ISS allows for different sites and web applications to be isolated from each other. To understand the importance of this, consider this example. The function here, each time it is run, asks for RAM to be allocated to it. The first time the function is run, the operating system allocates 1 KB of RAM to the function as requested. The second time the function is run, the operating system again allocates 1 KB of RAM to the function as requested. The third time, the same thing. Notice that by the fourth time the function has run, the operating system has allocated 4 KB of RAM to the function. The function should be giving the RAM back to the operating system when it is finished. Bugs like these are called memory leaks. In time, the memory leak will start consuming all the physical RAM and start using the paging file, causing performance problems on the server. When this occurs, the performance of all the applications on the server suffer, all because of one buggy function. To combat this, ISS allows you to set up application pools to isolate different websites and applications. This allows you to have a more granular control over ISS and helps prevent one part of ISS causing performance problems to other parts. If you need to stop or restart a particular part of ISS, you can do so without affecting other applications. Application pools allows you to set CPU limits. This prevents one application or website using all the CPU. Next, you can set recycling options. Recycling means the current process is replaced by a new process. To do this, ISS first completes any current request and then starts a new process. This new process replaces the old process. If you have a memory leak using up all your free RAM, the memory allocated to that process will be released. This stops a memory leak from eventually using up all your free RAM. Recycling effectively does the same as stopping and starting the application pool, but it does it in a way that does not take the service down in the process. Let's have a look at application pools in action. To create a new application pool, first run the ISS admin tool from the Start menu under Administrative Tools. Expand down to Application Pools. You can see in the center the application pools that have already been created by default or manually. To create a new application pool, right-click the application pool and select Add Application Pool. For the name, enter a descriptive name. The name is used for administrative purposes and not seen by the user. Next, you can select the .NET framework to use. I only have the option for version 2 or no managed code. If your application does not require .NET, you can set this to no managed code. If you can, leave managed pipeline to integrated. If you are running an application that was created under a previous version of IIS, you may have compatibility problems and may need to set this option to classic. Once the new application pool is created, if you want to configure it some more, right-click on it and select the option Advanced Settings. If you need to set CPU limits, you can do so under the CPU section. The rest of the settings should be left on default, unless you have a specific need to change them. If you right-click on the application pool and go down to Recycling, you can set when the application pool will recycle. By default, the application pool will recycle every 29 hours. You can set the option to recycle after a certain number of requests if you prefer. If your server has low activity periods, I would suggest getting it to recycle outside peak times. Next, you can set the recycling time based on how much virtual memory is being used, or how much private memory is being used. These are both useful options if you believe you have a memory leak. The next screen determines when recycling will log an event in the event viewer. By default, it will log an event at regular time intervals, or if recycling is triggered because of a certain amount of virtual memory is used, or private memory has been used. Lastly, you can set it to record events when a number of requests has been reached, or at a scheduled time. Remember, these logging options are based on the options on the previous screen. If these are not enabled, then no event will be logged. The runtime events cover events like administrators forcing a recycle. In a moment, I will show you how an administrator can trigger a recycle. Configuration changes will log an event anytime a configuration change is made that forces a recycle to occur. Lastly, ISAPI can report when an application pool appears to be unhealthy. When this occurs, ISAPI can ask for a recycle to be performed. Ticking any option on this page will cause an event to be logged only when that action occurs. The options on this page do not affect when recycling occurs. If you want to manually run recycling, right-click the application pool, select Recycle. This will cause the application pool to recycle immediately. Web applications are very similar to virtual directories. The main difference is that you would use a web application when the data you are presenting has code in it. Virtual directories are used for presenting static data to end users. As you can see, the process of adding web applications is the same as adding a virtual directory. Right-click on the website and then select the option Add Application. From here, enter the name you'd like the web application to appear as. Next, you can select the application pool that you would like the application to run under. The rest of the options are the same as virtual directory. Enter the path of the web application. You can also set up permissions to connect up to and test these permissions as you would with virtual directories. Once you have created the web application, it will appear under your website. To access the data and code in this web application, just add the name to the end of your URL, in this case, Store. This concludes managing websites. With ISS 7, you can run web applications in a more controlled way, giving the end user a much better experience.